Now I'd like to introduce Karen Osterhaus, a paralegal and experienced education and disabilities rights advocate. She works with students in grades K through 12 who have been identified and unidentified disabilities to ensure appropriate educational programming and support, including the creation of individual education programs, 504 plans, and related services. Thank you for joining us, Karen. I appreciate you coming and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, so thank you for having me here today. Certainly we want to keep Taylor in our thoughts and hope that she's doing well. As a parent of a child with multiple disabilities myself, I can certainly relate to some of what Nicole was talking about, in terms of trying to get Taylor her best education. And I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about some of the procedural safeguards that are in place through our public schools that you can leverage in the event that you run into some of the things like bullying or removal of an aid that Nicole referenced in her presentation. So most students with disabilities, be it spina bifida or something else, are going to be able to use a law called the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, to ensure and preserve their rights in school. As much as we want to raise our children up, as much as we want to encourage them, as much as we want them to be confident and strong individuals in and of themselves, we also want to have the support of the systems that are supposed to, and frankly, by law must, also provide them with the education that they are entitled to. So students with disabilities, again, whether it be spina bifida or some other disability, are entitled to programming specific to the needs of their individual situation. So, we don't know what that may have been for Taylor, but every student is entitled to an individualized education. Every student with a diagnosed disability is entitled to an individualized education program. The first step in getting an individualized education program, or what we call an IEP, is a thorough evaluation. Now, a parent can request an evaluation or the school can request an evaluation. So if you see your student struggling, if they're struggling academically, socially, physically, behaviorally, if they are being bullied, you probably want to get them an evaluation and find out what, leverage the evaluation to find out exactly what is happening in school. If they don't want to go to school, if they are struggling with a particular teacher or task at school, you may want to ask for an evaluation. Some disabilities are going to be obvious, right? Again, like spina bifida, there are kids who use wheelchairs and other pieces of equipment that make their disabilities very obvious, but there can also be disabilities that are less visible. And some of the things on this list are not sometimes what we think of as things that require an IEP necessarily, but they're considered invisible disabilities. So if you have a child who's struggling with anxiety or depression, some sort of trauma or effects of trauma, things like chronic fatigue, diabetes, a specific learning disability. If you see something in your child where they excel in most areas, but they really struggle in one particular subject, they may have some sort of discrete learning disability that's not readily apparent. If they may have a vision impairment or hearing impairment, or maybe even a sensory processing disorder. So before the school can evaluate them, they're going to need the consent of the parent, guardian, or if you have some sort of educational decision maker. Anytime the school wants to take an action like this on behalf of a student with a disability or suspected disability, you're going to want to get that change in notice of that change in writing. And in Pennsylvania, we call this prior written notice, or a NORAP, notice of recommended educational placement. So in Nikel's case, where she was talking about the fact that, for example, the aid had been removed and she wasn't even aware, in Pennsylvania, we would ask for what they call a NORAP, or an intent to make that change in writing. So in Pennsylvania, removal of that aid without notice would have been considered, that would have been considered a sort of violation of this policy. So when you ask for an evaluation, when there needs to be a change in educational programming, ask the school to provide you notice of that in writing. If you ask for an evaluation and the school doesn't want to do it or doesn't think it's necessary, ask them to give you this NORAP and explain to you why they don't think it's necessary. And that triggers then a number of procedural safeguards that you can make use of to continue to pursue the evaluation, or perhaps other supports and services. So once we have an IEP, hopefully, that provides a student with supports and services, it's important that you understand that a parent is considered a full member of the IEP team. So you can attend all the meetings, you have a right to see any documents related to your child. When you attend an IEP meeting, and they can be large meetings, it can be a number of members of the school team, and sometimes parents are intimidated at the thought of going, as just one person. You have the right to be supported at that meeting by, an advocate, your spouse, your child's other parent, if there is one, a partner, a friend, another individual, someone who has knowledge of the child at these IEP meetings. If your first language is not English, you do have the right to have any communications sent to you in your first language. And, sometimes that's important in our work as organizations. If we're working with folks who maybe their first language isn't English, there's a difference though between sort of being proficient in the day-to-day and being proficient with some of these documents and evaluations, and even medical reports and things that may use words that folks don't see every day. So you really want to hone in on any language needs. The IEP team must meet at least once a year to review the student's education plan. If you see bullying, or like Nicole was again talking about Taylor's aid being removed without notice, that's a good reason to get the team together again and try to see what's going on. So the IEP team has to meet at least once a year, but it can meet more frequently. And I would say, they need to meet as often as they need to meet, especially if there are instances where the child's not getting the support that was in the IEP, or there's bullying or other things going on. I do also want to say, students have a right to an education with all the supports that they're entitled to, but they also do have the right to be free from discrimination or mistreatment at school events. Really what Nicole was talking about, some of the things were bullying, but when you have a child in a wheelchair who's being told to walk, essentially, so she's being bullied as a result of her disability, that crosses the line into harassment, which is, I'm not an attorney, but which is actually a much more serious charge, some very serious form of bullying. And there are policies and there are laws around that, and each school should have a specific policy and a specific compliance officer to deal with those things. So, if you're seeing any of that at school or with any of the kids that you work with, that is something to take really seriously. And I would employ the protections of the compliance officers and other folks in the school district. So something else just to sort of keep in mind. This is a list of resources, again, sort of here in Pennsylvania. In terms of parent advocacy, we have something called the local task force here in Pennsylvania, which is a little bit unusual, but it's parent-led. There's one in every school district in the state of Pennsylvania. You don't have to be a parent to join, but it's a great way to familiarize yourself with issues impacting students with disabilities, seek out disparities and look for ways to remedy them. help advocate for funding and other resources. And keep in mind that justice for students with disabilities lifts all students. If we can reach out and meet the needs of the students who are most in need, it really does help all students. There are some more resources here if you want to advocate. Again, as a parent, these are places that you can get resources and one-on-one advocacy. All of these agencies provide services for free, and I'd strongly encourage you to take advantage of any of them. So let's see. Okay. I got a question about whether or not I can share this PowerPoint, and certainly I'm happy to do that. I would also encourage you, I'm happy to do this as an advocate. Your local task force, if you are in Pennsylvania, or any of the folks on this slide, will provide free trainings for parents and other interested parties. So if you want additional information, you don't have to be part of an organization. If you have just a couple of parents, certainly I or other of these advocates would be happy to provide additional trainings for you. So I think that's really sort of the end of my formal presentation. I think, yesterday we talked a lot about things specific to Black girls and how they're targeted and how they're scrutinized more than other students in public schools. And so I think it's even more important in some ways to know and understand some of these policies and procedures so that if something comes up, you have a way to work the system to your child's advantage. It's wonderful for moms to get together. It's wonderful for parents to get together. Absolutely, that's how change is made, no question. But in the heat of the moment, you want to be able to say, for example, if there's some kind of behavior issue, you want to be able to say, no, my child has an IEP and therefore is entitled to these protections. So here's how this is going to go. Or you want to be able to look at suspected disabilities and say, no, this, my child did this because it's a manifestation, this behavior is a manifestation of a certain type of disability. And so we're going to look at this in a different way. So really, it's just important to understand some of these supports that are already available and baked into the system. Sometimes schools, are not going to be forthcoming about what some of these protections and ways that you can work within the system might be. So it's important to have just, at least an understanding of them from the jump, so that if you need to, you can leverage them on behalf of your child.
Thank you, Karen. I want to remind the audience, if you have any questions for Karen, we have a few minutes before our next panel will start. Put them in the chat or use the Q&A as someone has already done. And that was a question that I had got. Somebody text me, asked me that same question about your slides. So they're, being requested. So we will make sure that we forward that out with the information of the summit and any additional information that's shared throughout the rest of the day.
Sure. And I'll just go ahead and drop my email in the chat, honestly. And if folks have questions, I know, especially being recorded, not everybody wants to ask maybe a personal question about their own child or whatever. You're more than welcome to, request my slides or any additional information. I'm happy to share.